Welcome to the Enneagram with Chelsea and Mikael. This is a positively deviant culture podcast anchored in the Enneagram. In this episode, we're continuing our conversation on the type 2. Before we launch into that, just a quick reminder.
Every episode, I want to remind listeners that this isn't a prescriptive, fixed tool, and that our conversations are designed to work with the material and the ideas in an exploratory way. And as long as I've been working with the Enneagram, my knowledge and application continues to evolve, and that's what we're here to do, is to learn together.
So, in this episode, we're talking about the movement points, and we teach it a little bit differently than most teachers. Most teachers would teach that the type 2 disintegrates, or in times of stress, takes on the worst traits of type 8, and integrates, or in times of flourishing and absolutely nailing it, takes on the best characteristics of the type 4. We are here to offer a more comprehensive view of the personality type 2, offering that in both times of stress and flourishing, or disintegration or integration, they take on the very best and worst characteristics of type 4 and to type 8. So now we're going to intentionally launch into polarized language to gesture in a short summary what it can look like for twos in stress and flourishing.
I'm going to say the best and the worst of type 4 in order to give a good picture of what it looks like when twos move to 4. Fours at their best, and you can check our previous episodes to get into a full description of the brilliances of type 4. But fours sit at the center of creation, and they're the portals which allow us to go into spaces and domains and territories that we wouldn't be able to access without them. So, fours teach us about truth and beauty, and the truth of humanity, and the truth of the negative spaces, what is less visible and immeasurable, and beauty. And beauty is not what we would assume it to be. Fours also are brilliant at creating something from nothing. They're the meaning makers. They can find substance and meaning from nothing, and they can find it everywhere in a way that is actually real. They expose these truths to the rest of us who can't quite see it. They're the deep divers of humanity in their worst. Fours are self-absorbed. They interpret everything in terms of their identity and what it means about them. They are very quick to be the victim of circumstance, relationships, others. They can be emotionally manipulative. And fours at their worst can use their self awareness as a substitute for actually becoming all of the things that they are signaling to be. Fours have enormous sense of self-awareness that can easily be hidden behind. They will use their awareness and the power of their awareness in the place of growth. What this means for a two is that twos can go to, as we've said, the most amazing aspects of a four when they're integrated and flourishing and really well developed. They'll take on these characteristics of a four, which is the creator, the meaning makers, the ability to see the invisible things. It's a kind of what I call night vision, where there's an ability to see under the blanket of the darkness what's actually there in both beauty and horror. Twos can access these places that are amazing and wildly mysterious, and then conversely can disintegrate and take on the worst parts of the four, where they become immobilized by their emotions. They can be addicted to longing and what's missing, and can be deeply fixed in their victim states and unwilling to grow inside and with all of the deep gifts that they've actually been given.
I started to understand myself so much better and understanding what was happening when I was disintegrating into four. And some of those things are the manipulative characteristics or the victimization. But also on the other side, the creating something from nothing definitely resonates in the way that I approach projects and work. And I don't need a template or a framework or a model. I can just start from nothing and figure it out. And that's really fun. But then the meaning, making meaning of something, you can overly start making meaning where there actually is no meaning. And that ties into the identity part where this is not about you. This is not actually happening. There's no meaning here. It's just a thing. Keep moving forward and don't get so fixed in it.
Exactly. So if you're a two, you should relate to some of the best and worst aspects of a four. These are the characteristics of a four that twos move to. Now, these are the things that do not make you a four, actually, which is why we talk about the movements. But they're places to notice and bring attention to because they're the most primary places that twos move to. And now for eights, eights sit at the center of resurrection. They're the ones that teach us how to overcome the biggest obstacles, to move mountains, to win wars, to bring the dead back to life. They are metaphorically the defibrillators, the electricity required to do the impossible. And they have this nuclear power. They're also gifted with not really being concerned as much compared to all other types about what others think of them. They're highly self empowered and teach us about agency and about decisiveness and self trust. And then in their worst, they can be some of the most externally destructive types because of the intensity and the power that they have access to. So they can be dismissive, bullies, forcing their will on others, incredibly argumentative for the sake of argument, and be instigators in that way of like just wanting to start fights to see how strong the other person is and to experience their own strength. These are intense places of both the eight's high side and low side. And so as a two, you'll often see twos go to the negative parts of an eight if they feel that someone they love is threatened. That's one of the first places twos will generally puff out, and their eight will come out as like kind of like a bear. Like, oh, you've gotten a little too close to the cubs, have we? And twos will take out the eight in them. And that can be both positive and negative, depending on the circumstance, right? Like if it's something that isn't actually a threat, then it'll be a negative side of the eight and it'll be bullying and dominating. But if it's actually a real circumstance where there is actual threat, then it's the positive side where an eight is willing to fight and protect and do what it takes without much consequence in terms of their mind or their anxieties or whatever.
The strength of the eight is highly complementary to the vulnerability of the type two. So previously we talked about the softness of the two and just how important it is to be able to integrate and to tap into that mama bear energy to balance things out. It's really important for the twos to think about what other people think of them. They're really getting their self-worth from the ability to be loved and needed. And so to be able to take on a bit of eight and not really care what other people think is also a really valuable trait. When it comes to the lower side of the argumentative and bullying and aggressive and dominant, I have been able to really catch myself in times of stress, noticing those traits and going, "Oh, I'm stressed out, I'm disintegrated." And even being able to use this construct in the workplace or in the home has been helpful to tee other people up to what's happening for me in those moments, not as an excuse, but to help them see where some of that's coming from, because it can come as a big surprise when you have this soft, nurturing personality that all of a sudden it's a very, very polarized opposite when those stressful eight characteristics come out.
It's similar when twos, as the place of grace and the place of restoration and healing, go to their eight self. They are able to tap into resurrection and the deepest spark to overcome an obstacle or to overcome death, which is the place of eights. Eights are pretty much trying constantly, consciously and unconsciously, to win death. And so the complementary factor is absolutely there, as you said, Chelsea, in terms of the softness and other centered that's paired with self power and self orientation in order to see themselves as the ultimate tool to solve this problem in a nuanced way. And eights and twos are in many ways up to the same thing, but they come at it in a different way with different skills. Twos definitely have a propensity to be codependent and to be overly accommodating and overly acquiesce. And the eight in them doesn't allow that. And to be thorough, neither does the four. The four is very independent and self oriented and uses themselves as a tool also in order to create and navigate. So you have the two, and I would say maybe the type that is most other centered, given two other types that are not very other centered to balance that out. And you have the eight that's more externalizing their power of, and you have the four that's more internalizing the power of. And this is an excellent balance for the two that can take both the skills of the eight and the skills of the four to heal humanity and to serve the soul of others. Those two power sources of an eight and a four combine in a very specific way to execute the two's job in the world. And that's what we're finding in this episode for all of the types, like what we're actually designed for and coded for and charged with in terms of our existential jobs in the world. We do not do it as well without primarily our two movement points. And then additionally, all of them, when we're integrated into all the other eight types, then we have reached a pinnacle. But to begin with, we have access to what we need the most, and that's the two other places of movement.
Yeah, the twos are the type that's least likely to really be in touch with their needs and even know themselves. So when it comes to figuring out our Enneagram type or what we want and need in life. And so that self trust and agency in the eight really complements strongly. And I have a couple of questions for you around resourcefulness. I have done a lot of traveling and I always thought that that was underpinning how I saw the world, navigated the world, and thought about the concept of resourcefulness. Do you have any perspectives on what the four or eight, or maybe just the core of the two, are adding to the picture of resourcefulness?
Yeah, I think the resourcefulness conversation has nothing to do with the applications of like how we are in traveling. It's pretty consistently a core quality of a two. Now, we can all learn how to be resourceful. So every type, any type can be resourceful. Twos, I think, are inherently the most resourceful by nature. And what resourceful means in this context is they're able to locate whatever they need in order to get the job done. And I think that the reason why they're resourceful is because they're gifted with knowing what's helpful and they're gifted with knowing what's useful. And so when that is activated for themselves on behalf of themselves, it's really beautiful that they can figure things out and know how to get stuff done. And I think that that's part of the eight in themselves in terms of, not rolling over too easily when there's an obstacle. And twos that are really integrated, they're able to overcome and problem solve really quickly when they're more integrated into their eight self versus when they're not. They can be much more easily stopped. They can be more easily overwhelmed by others' needs. And so they are not able to get to those places of resourcefulness as quickly when they're less integrated to an eight and a four. Resourcefulness is a quality primarily organic and natural in twos, but twos can get stopped by the pressures that others put on them in terms of everyone else's needs before their own. It becomes a conflict in overcoming challenges and obstacles.
There's a couple other areas that come to mind around being a connector. And I think that's linked to the resourcefulness, but it's through resourcing through people. And a lot of twos that I know, and I find myself often suggesting books and recipes and resources and connecting people. And this is all stemmed from what might be helpful. And then I have a final question around environment. And we've talked a little bit about sensitivity, but any thoughts on nostalgia and aesthetics of the actual room and lighting and noise, things like that you've noticed as traits common across twos?
The heart centers actually are all able to absorb the environment in a very distinct way compared to the rest of us. So twos, threes, and fours can all do this. Twos and fours are the most highly in tune to the aesthetics in terms of absorption of colors and sounds, and the emotional states of others are more sensitized to these things compared to a three. So since we're talking about the movements, I think this is a place that twos and fours share very distinctively. I would say that this is a primarily a four thing. Two's absorption of the environment is far more centered around others, the relationships, the emotional states of others, the stress, the all of the elements that are around human expression, human emotion, human affect. Twos are naturally more in tune with that. Fours are more naturally inclined to the aesthetics in terms of sound and color and taste and texture. But we go in every direction. So this is a definite connection that twos and fours exchange are these sensitivities around the experiences that we can absorb in our environment and in the relationships that we have to others.
That resonates deeply personally, being able to feel what someone's feeling when they walk in a room or when I walk in a room and there's people there. But it also translates professionally in facilitation, where I can watch someone's body language and know that they have a question and pause what I'm saying and call on them to draw that out of them. When you're really in tune to that, you can actually invite the space for then people to share their needs and then address those needs.
Part of the ways that twos can anticipate others' needs is by reading the person clearly. So it's not from nowhere, it's from two places. Twos are gifted with empathy more than most, and they're also reading other people's states, emotional and physical states, more acutely. So those two factors combined are the source of their ability to anticipate people's needs. They can feel what the other person would feel, empathy, and they can read what the person is actually saying, which is giving information about what they need.
Thanks for listening. To engage or work with us, reach out via the link in our show notes and make sure to click on the follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes.